The night that would later be remembered as the Torpedo Alley Massacre began with a silence so deep that even veteran sailors felt uneasy. It was the Mediterranean in the summer of 1943, a region normally alive with wind and waves and distant engines. But on this particular night, the sea was smothered beneath a fog so dense that it erased the horizon and swallowed the moon. Italian convoy escorts stood on their decks, listening for dangers they could not see, while somewhere inside that white silence, a handful of American patrol torpedo boats drifted like ghosts toward their prey. Shortly before 11 o'clock, Lieutenant Commander William Leeson of PT Squadron 22 leaned over the chart table inside his tiny wooden craft. He was a young officer, barely past his mid-20s, but he had already fought enough night actions to know when the sea was giving him a gift. "This fog," he whispered to his second officer, "is a curtain. We are behind it. They are not." His words were soft, steady, and confident, the kind of voice that told his crew that something remarkable was about to happen. The American PT boats had slipped from their hiding cove shortly after sunset. They moved at idle power, their engines barely whispering, their hulls gliding across the water like drifting shadows. These boats, built of wood and powered by aviation engines, were designed for speed and sudden violence. But tonight, speed was unnecessary. The fog did the work for them, muffling every sound and hiding every movement. The Italians believed the sea was empty, but in truth, it carried vessels armed with torpedoes powerful enough to rip open steel hulls in seconds. The Italian convoy consisted of 3 merchant vessels carrying ammunition, fuel, and armored cars intended for the defense of Sicily. They were escorted by 2 destroyers and a torpedo boat, whose crews had no idea that American forces had intercepted their radio traffic earlier in the afternoon. By 9 o'clock, the convoy was inside the most dangerous stretch of coastline in the theater, a corridor Allied sailors had begun calling Torpedo Alley. Yet even here, the Italian commander, Captain Emilio Barbieri, felt relieved when he saw the fog thickening. "It will hide us from aircraft," he told his officer. "But the sea has a strange way of turning comfort into catastrophe." Shortly after 10 o'clock, the lead Italian destroyer slowed its pace, unsure of its position. The fog was so heavy that the lookout could see no farther than the bow. Officers strained their ears, convinced they were safe, unaware that directly ahead of them, American PT boats floated silently in a loose crescent formation. Lieutenant Leeson raised his binoculars. He saw nothing but white mist, but he knew exactly where the convoy was. The Americans had been tracking the Italians using dead reckoning and intercepted messages for nearly 5 hours. "Hold position," Leeson ordered quietly. "Let them come to us." Moments later, the sound reached them. It was faint at first, like a whisper below the fog, but it grew steadily. The vibration of engines, heavy engines, engines carrying cargo. The convoy was close, dangerously close. The men aboard the PT boats tensed. Some rested their hands on the cool metal of their torpedo tubes. Others wiped fog from their goggles. A few murmured comments, nervous but excited. For many of them, this would be the first time they would launch a torpedo in actual combat. The destroyer now loomed less than 100 yards away, though no one could see it. Leeson could feel its presence through the vibrations shivering across the water. "Steady," he breathed. "Let them walk into it." To his left, PT 306 adjusted her course by a few degrees. To his right, PT 305 did the same. The formation enclosed the convoy like a tightening noose. The Italians were unaware that they had sailed into a trap so perfect that no textbook could have drawn it better. Then it happened. At precisely 11 minutes past 10 o'clock, the fog shifted just long enough for Leeson to see the vague shape of the lead Italian freighter. It appeared as a dark smudge inside the white haze, moving slowly, unaware of the danger lurking ahead. Leeson lowered his binoculars, exhaled, and whispered, "Fire 1." The first American torpedo left its tube with a muted hiss. There was no flash, no roar, only the soft thump of release and the quiet splash of water. A moment later, PT-306 fired 2 more. PT-305 added another. 4 torpedoes slid away into the fog, invisible, unstoppable, and aimed at the heart of the convoy. Inside the Italian freighter's bridge, a lookout blinked into the haze and saw nothing. He stepped forward, wiped fog from his eyelashes, and prepared to call for a course correction. He never finished his sentence. The sea beneath him erupted in a sheet of flame and steel as the first torpedo struck the bow. A wall of water rose like a black mountain, engulfing the deck. Men were thrown into the air as the freighter's forward hold exploded. Ammunition crates inside the cargo bay detonated instantly. The entire bow vanished in a spray of smoke and shattered iron. Before the shockwave faded, the second torpedo hit the freighter amidships. This blast tore open the hull, splitting the vessel nearly in half. The deck folded like paper. Flames climbed into the fog, glowing orange against the white mist. Men screamed for help, some stumbling toward lifeboats they could not see, others thrown overboard without understanding what had struck them. To those aboard the remaining ships, it felt as if the sea itself had attacked them. The Italian commander, Captain Barbieri, rushed onto the bridge of his flagship destroyer. He stared into the fog, unable to see the vessel he knew had been hit, and shouted orders for evasive maneuvering. "Hard to port," he yelled. "Full speed ahead." But turning a steel destroyer in blind fog is like steering a mountain in darkness. The ship responded slowly, heavy engines roaring as it attempted to pivot away from the unseen threat. The Americans were already moving. Leeson ordered his engines to half power, sliding PT-304 out of her position. The roar of the destroyer's engines told him exactly where it was. The fog carried the sound like a guide. As the destroyer surged forward, PT-306 drifted behind it, positioning herself perfectly for another strike. The third and fourth American torpedoes found their mark moments later. They struck the second freighter almost simultaneously, one beneath the stern, the other beneath the forward cargo hold. The blasts were so violent that Italian sailors aboard the escorting torpedo boat believed they had sailed into a minefield. The freighter shuddered, lifted, and then broke apart. Flames burst from every hatch. Oil poured into the sea, creating a burning slick that spread beneath the fog like a sheet of fire. The Italian destroyer attempted to open fire, but it could not find a target. Every direction was white. Every echo bounced against the fog. Gunners fired blindly, sending shells into empty water. Some exploded close enough to rock the PT boats, but none came close to hitting them. The Americans slipped between the blasts with the agility of dancers, repositioning themselves for another attack. At 20 minutes past 10 o'clock, PT-306 crept within 50 yards of the Italian destroyer. Her crew could hear Italian voices shouting, boots running, metal clanging. The fog was so thick that the ships might have collided had the PT boat drifted closer. But Leeson had planned for this. He raised his hand and whispered, "Ready." His torpedo man leaned into position. Another officer counted the seconds under his breath. The destroyer surged forward, unaware of the danger gliding alongside it. Leeson dropped his hand. The torpedo fired. The destroyer never saw it. The explosion struck the destroyer's port side with the force of a hammer blow. The blast tore open a hole large enough for a truck to pass through. Water flooded the engine room instantly. The lights flickered, then died. Steam roared from ruptured pipes. Men were thrown across the deck, some tumbling overboard into the burning sea. Captain Barbieri staggered against the railing as the destroyer rolled to one side. "What hit us?" he shouted, but there was no answer. The fog hid everything. For the Italians, the night had turned into a nightmare of confusion. Engines roared, flames hissed, men screamed, officers barked orders no one could follow. The convoy was no longer a formation but a scattering of crippled ships. One freighter burned from bow to stern, another was sinking rapidly. The destroyer listed heavily, fighting to remain afloat. The last surviving freighter attempted to break free from the chaos, accelerating blindly into the fog. Leeson saw the movement. He turned to his helmsman and said, "Intercept." PT 304 surged forward, slicing through the fog as if pulled by destiny. The freighter's engines echoed ahead, louder and louder. The crew prepared another torpedo, their hands trembling not from fear but from adrenaline. These were young men whose lives were measured not in years, but in battles fought before dawn. At 10:30, PT 304 fired her final torpedo of the night. The freighter tried to turn, but the move was too slow. The torpedo struck beneath the stern, blowing the propellers completely off. The ship ground to a halt, drifting helplessly as water flooded every compartment. Men abandoned ship, calling out for rescue, but the fog swallowed their voices. Within 30 minutes, 3 Italian freighters had been destroyed, 1 escort crippled, and the convoy annihilated. The Americans, having fired every torpedo they carried, vanished back into the fog, their engines throttled low. They did not need to stay and watch the ship sink. They knew their work was complete. The sea behind them burned with flames and the cries of men, but ahead of them lay only darkness and the promise of escape. When the sun finally rose, shortly after 5 o'clock the next morning, fishermen along the Sicilian coast reported a strange sight. Charred debris floated across the water. A torn lifeboat drifted upside down. Patches of oil burned weakly on the waves. One survivor later said, "At dawn, the fog lifted and showed us hell." Radio intercepts recorded the Italian Naval Command's response. One officer wrote, "They attacked from the mist and vanished into it. We fought nothing. We saw nothing. We were destroyed by ghosts." In the days that followed, Italian intelligence worked desperately to understand what had happened. Some believed submarines had launched the attack. Others suspected mines. A few officers even proposed that British motor torpedo boats had coordinated with aircraft. But only those who survived long enough to be rescued knew the truth. They had been attacked by American PT boats, small wooden craft that struck with the power of battleships. Word of the battle spread quickly among Allied forces. The officers of PT Squadron 22 received commendations for their precision and courage. Their success proved what many naval strategists had long suspected, that small, fast, lightly armored vessels could dominate confined waters through stealth and audacity. In the Mediterranean, where narrow channels and coastal fog created ideal ambush conditions, the PT boats became legends. For the Italians, the memory of that night was a wound that never healed. Sailors spoke of the fog as if it were alive. They described the explosions as sudden and unnatural, arriving without warning. Some swore they had seen no boats at all, only flashes of fire rising from the sea. Others, too dazed to understand, believed they had been betrayed by fate itself. But the truth was simpler and far more extraordinary. The American PT crews won because they understood the sea better than their enemies. They used the fog not as a hazard but as a weapon. They used silence as their shield. They used speed as their sword. And when the moment came, they struck with such precision that the battle was all but decided before the first explosion lit the night. Historians later studied the engagement as a classic example of asymmetrical warfare. The Italians possessed larger ships, heavier guns, and superior armor. But none of that mattered in the darkness of Torpedo Alley. What mattered were the men aboard the PT boats, their instincts sharpened by countless night patrols, their courage steadied by training and trust, their determination rooted in the belief that even small forces can change the course of a campaign. By the time Allied forces invaded Sicily in July of 1943, the Italian supply lines had been weakened severely. Convoys hesitated to travel at night. Escorts doubled their patrols. Morale faltered. The memory of the Torpedo Alley Massacre haunted commanders, influencing decisions that shaped the outcome of the Mediterranean War. But for the American sailors who lived through that night, the story was far more personal. They remembered the heavy silence, the trembling fog, the soft thump of torpedoes leaving their tubes. They remembered the glow of flames inside the mist. They remembered the voices they heard but never saw. Some carried those memories long after the war, unable to sleep on foggy nights, unable to forget the destruction they had caused. And yet, they also remembered something else. They remembered the sense of unity aboard those tiny wooden boats. They remembered the quiet confidence of young men facing impossible odds. They remembered the knowledge that even in the vastness of war, small acts of precision and bravery can alter history. In the years that followed, veterans spoke of that night with a mixture of pride and sorrow. Pride in what they had accomplished, sorrow for the men who never saw the attack coming. But none doubted the significance of the battle. It had shown the world that PT boats were not toys, not auxiliary craft, not expendable tools. They were fast, fierce, and deadly. They were the knife at the enemy's throat. As one officer said many years later, "We were small boats in a big war." But on that night, the big war belonged to us. The Torpedo Alley Massacre remains one of the most remarkable naval ambushes of the Second World War, a moment when darkness, weather, and human resolve aligned to create a victory far greater than the size of the vessels involved. It was a battle fought without witnesses, without searchlights, without clear skies or calm seas. It was fought in the mist, between men who could barely see their own hands, let alone their enemies. And yet, in that blindness, decisive action emerged. The Mediterranean remembers that night. The fog remembers. And history remembers the American PT sailors who entered the white silence without fear and left behind a sea burning with the wreckage of an entire convoy. They were young men in wooden boats, but for one unforgettable hour, they were the masters of the sea.